Morning, everyone. It's a little intimidating having many of the prefects lined up behind me, but we are going to have a prefects chapel, and that's a little step into the unknown. I have no idea what they've got planned, but I did just want to make a quick reference. This morning before chapel, we have had the Sorting Hat and Mrs. Samuel have been up at Levine and Stanton, and there have been representatives from the other senior houses at it, and it was pretty nail-biting, pretty emotional, pretty exciting, and those grade 8 students are just tremendously thrilled to be joining your houses. And my one request to you, they'll be up with you at track and field, is of course, as the House representatives did, please welcome them into your houses. It is their new home away from home. Take really good care for them as they finish their grade 8 year and step into grade 9. The Rev is away, hence the Prefects Chapel. We do have a couple of alumni back in our midst from Duxbury. I certainly know that Roberto Galindo is here, former prefect. Welcome, Roberto, and I'm sure there are some other alumni sprinkled around this room as well. I'm going to hand over to Darwin.
I'd like to take this time to acknowledge that we're on the land and unceded territories of the Cowichan and Malahat people. And I'd like to introduce the first hymn, Morning Has Broken, number 27.
Thank you all. Please be seated. Hi, everyone, and welcome to chapel. This week's chapel, you may have noticed, is being run entirely by the outgoing prefects. This is partly because Rev isn't here, and partly because the prefect chapel is a Shawnigan tradition we wanted to bring back in our last days here. So, without further ado, I'm here to make a few opening remarks and introduce our theme. Author Brené Brown once said, "Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change." In leadership, vulnerability is often seen as a flaw. However, it is quite the opposite. It is often synonymous with courage. The strongest leaders are those who have the courage to show their true selves and stand by that no matter what. Greta Thunberg, a young activist, is courageous, yet vulnerable enough to address the world's most influential leaders, all while being unapologetically herself. Malala Yousafzai, one of the youngest recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize, has the bravery to fight for gender equality and education for all, exposing herself to the consequences that come with that fight. The grade 12 students who got up to the podium this week and spoke to their grade about their deepest and most personal beliefs were vulnerable, and also some of the greatest leaders Shawnigan has ever seen. Vulnerability isn't always comfortable, but it is not a weakness. If you haven't caught on yet, the theme for today's chapel is vulnerability, specifically in leadership. It takes a lot of strength to put yourself forward for a leadership position, and even more to fill the role. So, as you listen today, think of those who have done just that. Think of those who have come before you, whose own leadership has paved the road to better things. Think of the new generation of Shawnigan leaders, of the transition happening in 2 weeks' time. And most importantly, think of those who have had the courage that many do not have, the courage to be vulnerable. I'm going to invite Catherine up for the first reading.
The Vulnerable Become More by Ashley Hibbs. The vulnerable become more resilient, more experienced, more determined than ever before. The vulnerable become more than a face, more than a tragedy, more than a news story. The vulnerable become more than their history, more than too poor, more than compliant, more than you're ready for. Because while the powerful go on living, the vulnerable become more.
Our second hymn will be hymn number 12, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. Please stand.
Thank you. Please be seated. That's tough. I'd first like to introduce the other alumni who's here, Caleb McHugh, former deputy head of house in Duxbury. Welcome back. And of course, welcome back, Roberto. I'll start now. Hey, everyone. My name is Jeremy Harvey, and I'm a grade 12 in Duxbury. And I have a confession to make to all of you. I have a severe addiction to fish tanks. Ever since I was young, my parents always told me that I was undoubtedly a fish in my past life, and I'll explain why. I drank at least 5 bottles of water a day, and I didn't drink anything else other than water. Fun fact about me, I actually hate fizzy drinks. I also loved being in bodies of water, whether it be the vast ocean or a little kiddie pool. I always wanted to swim and be submerged by the liquid that is renowned as water. Alongside this, I found marine life so fascinating. I acquired a PADI diving license at the early age of 10 and went diving whenever the opportunity presented itself. There's just something surreal about being able to freely swim in the ocean and be surrounded by such alien life forms like sea urchins and lionfish. Those outlandish fish look almost as bizarre as when J-Dubs actually once had hair. I mean, it seems impossible, but he had a whole afro going somehow. Anyways, for my solo project this year, I was able to build a fish tank for Duxbury, and you can imagine how much joy this brought me. I got to bring the marine ecosystem I so much loved and enjoyed and put it right smack bang in the middle of the common room. I really like my fish tank. I mean, I like it so much that in my free time, I'll go sit by it and watch my little fish dart around the tank. But as soon as I hear someone coming in the hallway, I immediately get up and walk around the middle of the common room on my phone so that no one thinks I'm some crazy fish geek, which I totally am. But at the end of the day, I care about my fish in my fish tank, just like how my mother cares for me. Now, put your hands up if you love your mom. If I don't see everyone's hands up, we're gonna have a problem. There we go. Now put your hands up again if you've actually told your mom just how much you really love her. See, I'm still missing some, but at least there's some rational humans in the building. My mother really spoiled me when I was a child, and to be honest, she still does. Not in the materialistic sense of things, but in love. My mom would go through the efforts of cutting me up an assortment of fruits just before bed and serving them on those cute little colorful plates. She'd tuck me in every night, and if I was really lucky, she'd massage my feet. Don't make it weird. Please. I basically got the most luxurious spa treatment every night. Anyway, my mom was the kindest and most caring individual you'll ever meet. She'd spend the night watching Cartoon Network on the TV with me and my little brother, rather than going out and spending time with her friends, because no matter what, she always wanted to be with her children. At some point, I didn't even know if she had friends because she was always with us. But as long as I was getting my fruits cut up before bed, I wasn't complaining. My mom was always there for me when I was younger, and she always will be. Then last year came one devastating moment. A moment that would change my life forever. A moment that left me in a disheveled state. I absolutely bombed my pre-calc test. I never failed a test so badly. In other words, the 50% Asian within me had never failed a test so badly. I was in shock. I felt like I had failed myself and my parents who gave me this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to come to Shawnigan. I mean, I was so miserable that my YouTube search history was filled with how to get over a failed test, how to be a useful human being in society, and LeBron James' best motivational speech of 2021. It was pretty bad, but when things go bad in my life, I always turn to my mom. I slowly dialed her number on my phone. My hands were trembling with fear. I didn't know what she was going to say to me, for I had never failed a test this badly before. I felt the most vulnerable I had ever been. The phone rang and rang and rang, and then, "Hi, sweetie, how are you?" I shakily replied, I'm good. Oh, good. So how's school going? Are you all? Mom, I'm not gonna lie. I absolutely bombed my math test. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I thought I did well, but apparently not. Please forgive me. Jeremy, who cares? Sorry, Mom, you want to say that again? I didn't hear you well. Who cares? It's only one test. I was baffled. Jeremy, I know you're a very smart boy, but you can't always be perfect. And it's only one test. At the end of the day, perfection is impossible to attain. So don't put too much stress on yourself, okay, sweetie? You can only imagine how surprised I was by this reply. But my mom made me realize one thing. Perfection is impossible to achieve. So why try so hard to achieve it? Here at Shawnigan, we have this unspoken culture of overachieving, this culture of achieving perfection. Unfortunately, the stigma here is to always study for tests and obtain this sense of perfection in everything we do. We must be perfect whenever we are in public. We must be perfect in the way we play sports. We must be perfect in the tests we write. But perfection is impossible. It's simply unfeasible to be perfect at everything, let alone one thing. Now, you all have to listen to me very carefully. I'm not saying go out and don't try in anything anymore, but go out and try to do things to the best of your ability. Don't strive for perfection, but strive to do the best you can. At the end of the day, everyone makes mistakes, no matter how skilled they are, but is the character in which they come back and learn from those mistakes is what builds true character. Take, for example, a tree. Now put your hand up if you've ever seen a perfect tree. Not a beautiful tree, but a perfect one. Now, if you put your hand up, you're definitely lying because you see, every tree has a fault. Some lean too much to the right, and some sway too much to the left. Some have too much moss on them, and some have some bark that's being ripped off. Yet somehow, they're all beautiful. However, when it comes to humans and their flaws, we seem to look right at the faults rather than the gift each and every one of us possess. This is what I had learned from my mother from that phone call. With this new mindset embedded into my moral compass, I entered grade 12 as a new individual. Kind of just like how Mr. Urath came into the new year with frosted tips looking like a 90s rock star. During my basketball season, I always tried my best and put my full effort into everything. However, I didn't make every shot I took. I didn't make every layup I shot, but that's okay. The same aspect goes for being a prefect. I wasn't a perfect prefect either. I was never able to fulfill everyone's goals and desires. I was never able to set up that inner house someone proposed. But man, did I try. And the organizational skills I've learned from my desperate attempts to organize something last second have definitely taught me how to plan out my time more. As long as I was learning from my mistakes and getting better, I was satisfied with my performance. A part of me believes that I wouldn't be the leader I am today if I had never called my mom and broken that news to her, for I would be too busy chasing a level of achievement that ultimately doesn't even exist. I would have never gotten those words of wisdom from my mother if I hadn't been vulnerable and talked to her despite being worried about her judgment. All in all, vulnerable individuals are usually the strongest individuals. Being vulnerable is a lot harder than you think. Coming forward to someone and addressing a sensitive topic is no simple task. Nevertheless, being vulnerable doesn't necessarily have to mean opening up to someone about your concerns. You can be just as vulnerable in your everyday life, like putting yourself out there and meeting new people, coming to a new school, trying a new sport, being willing to cry in front of others, or even telling the whole school that you're an absolute fish geek. To be able to be vulnerable is to be able to put yourself in a state of being where you might get made fun of, or you might even be judged. But the lessons you learn from being vulnerable are the lessons you hold on to for the rest of your life. In my case, it was about how perfection is merely a 10-letter word that describes something that doesn't even exist. The mistakes we make when we perform activities are the most important keys to growth. It is about how you learn from your flaws and be open with yourself. And most importantly, to truly understand that making mistakes is okay. After all, if the Leaning Tower of Pisa were straight, nobody would care. Thank you.
Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you, Jeremy, for that speech. That was amazing. I'd like to invite up Brianna for the musical presentation.
Good morning. So, how many of you feel that music is really powerful? Let's see. Yeah. See, if you hear a song playing over and over again during a certain time period of your life, chances are you will hear that, if you hear it again, you'll be transported back to that moment when you were listening to it. You will feel the emotions of that time period. Today, I will be playing a piano piece called Nuvole Bianche by Ludovico Einaudi. I first learned how to play it when I was in grade 9, and ever since then, it has become my Shawnigan anthem. Some of you will probably recognize this piece as the music emanating from Marion Hall before lunch, because of how many times I've played it. Since my time here is coming to a close, I find myself reflecting on all of my experiences. Even though I am excited to enter into the next phase of my life, I really don't want to leave Shawnigan and all of the people I've grown close to. I think that this piece conveys the emotions of my Shawnigan experience pretty much perfectly. I hope you enjoy.
that was beautiful. Now for the prayers. We take a moment to consider those in need. Please respond to the bidding, Lord, in your mercy, with "Hear our prayers." We pray for the families of the victims from recent mass shootings, for peace, and for a change to be made. Lord, in your mercy. We pray for the women and girls across the world whose reproductive health decisions and choices are being threatened for their safety and their rights to be protected. Lord, in your mercy. We pray for the LGBTQ+ community around the world who still don't feel safe expressing their identity, and that our community continues to remain an inclusive, loving, and supportive environment for all. Lord, in your mercy. We pray for the class of 2022 as they enter their final 2 weeks at Shawnigan, hoping that it's filled with laughter, joy, and lasting memories. Lord, in your mercy. We take a brief moment to consider any other needs in our hearts. Lord, in your mercy.
Hello, everybody. Before I start with the closing remarks, I'd just like to say, Brianna, that was fantastic. It was sort of giving those vibes in those coming-of-age movies where the character has this massive realization and then they have to be all vulnerable and confess to something, and there's like the montage. Anyways, it got my adrenaline going for that. So thank you. All right, so 2 days ago, I was asked 2 questions that made me feel a little bit vulnerable. One of them was, "Hey Grace, would you do the closing remarks for chapel?" So here I am. And the other one was at the 5-year dinner, where Miss Milne turns to me and goes, "Grace, do you have any minor infractions or embarrassing stories that you want to tell the other people at the table?" And I said, "Well, Miss Milne, I do indeed." So, just like Jeremy, it's confession time, and I will confess, I'm actually quite terrified of fish. They just seem really weird to me, so I respect your love of fish, but I can't say I share it. And I hope you'll bear with me because I'm quite literally going off the cuff. I don't know if you can see, but I have my notes written on my hand. So I hope I won't be stammering too much. Anyways, confession time. There are probably about 100 or so people in this room who knew me when I was in grade 8. Yes, I'm a 5-year. And grade 8 Grace was very shy. Grade 8 Grace had straight across bangs and 2 little braids and crooked glasses. And grade 8 Grace didn't really talk very much. She was shy, she didn't put herself out there, except this one time, and boy did it backfire. I don't know if you remember Mr. Robertson, Mr. David Robertson, who we fondly called D-Rob. I don't know if he's watching this live stream today, but I hope he is, because this is a funny story, and it has a lot to do with him. So D-Rob was retiring in my grade 8 year, and I was the last group of grade 8s that he would ever have. And I thought, you know what would be awesome? You know what would be a really good idea? This is a terrible idea, spoiler alert. It would be a really good idea if I sent him, a little comic, just something funny about Shawnigan, because this was during my comic drawing phase. I really enjoyed drawing little characters and situations. And I thought, you know what would be really funny? What if I made fun of how much chicken we eat at Shawnigan? Because we ate even more chicken than we do now, if you can believe that. And of course, this was not meant to be rude in any ways, because I quite like chicken. This was before I was vegetarian, so I had no complaints. It was rather just drawing attention to, oh look, isn't this funny? Look at a Shawniganism. And so I drew a little comic, and it had 2 kids standing in his office. One was holding a, what are they called? Magnifying glass. One was holding a magnifying glass, and the other one was holding a piece of paper, and he was exclaiming, "Oh my God, we finally solved the mystery of why we eat so much chicken." And the other girl goes, "What? What is it?" He goes, "D-Rob is the CEO of the biggest poultry producing company in British Columbia." I thought this was hilarious. My grandparents thought this was hilarious. They were like, yes. And my grandparents are very good friends with D-Rob. And so I snuck the comic in a little envelope, anonymously, under his door, and went about my day. I was thinking, this will give him a chuckle. This will make him laugh. The next day, Tuesday morning chapel. This is like 8 o'clock in the morning. D-Rob storms down the aisle. His face is red, and he's Scottish, so when I say his face is red, I mean like the color of a fire engine. I can make those jokes because I'm also Scottish, and my face is probably red. Is it? Is it red? No? Good. Anyway, he comes storming down the aisle, and he puts his fists up on the lectern, and he's like, I have never been so disappointed in my life. And we're all sitting there like, oh no, what happened? He says, someone had the brilliant idea to leave me hate mail. And I'm like, oh no. I'm a little grade 8, mind you. And he goes, somebody thought it would be funny to complain about the food that is served here at Shawnigan. And he proceeds to describe the comic, and everyone else is sort of laughing nervously. And I'm just sitting there, I'm slinking farther and farther down into my seat. Oh, I hope he doesn't look at me. I think this was back when Strath was sitting at the front. Again, this was 5 years ago, I guess. So I was sitting right at the front, and I was like, oh God, what do I do? And he says, this student better come and apologize to me. You have disgraced the school. You have disgraced the kitchen team. You have disgraced the name of Christopher Windley Lonsdale. For those of you who don't know, I am the great niece of Christopher Windley Lonsdale, so that's a really good track record for me. And I think I may have lasted about 6 hours through the day before finally my hands were shaking, my body was shaking, I couldn't pay attention in class. I go up to the fourth floor to communications where Mrs. Connolly, my house director at the time, worked, and I burst into her office in tears, and I'm like, Mrs. Connolly, I have sinned. And she goes, now, Grace, I don't think you could possibly sin. What is the problem? And so I confessed to her that I had accidentally left hate mail to the headmaster. And so, of course, Mrs. Connolly, like any good-natured adult who would want to help guide me, through my journey of redemption, said, okay, well, let's go find him and talk to him. And I was like, oh, no, I would prefer for this to just blow over. I don't need to confess to anything. He knows my family. He knows where I live. And eventually, I was dragged up to the field hockey fields, where he was standing, still looking rather put out. And I awkwardly walk up to him, and I'm like, hey, D-Rob. And he goes, hello, Grace. And I confessed to him, and I said, look, I'm so sorry. I accidentally left. It wasn't meant to be hate mail, I promise. It was meant to be something funny for you. And so we sort of exchanged this awkward hug. And I'm tears going down my face, and he's really looking unsure what to do with this crying 13-year-old girl. And I look up, and Arden's taking a photo of us. Yeah, I don't know if you still have that photo, but that was a good one. So what is this all to say? Well, this is an example of vulnerability, and I think when we talk about vulnerability, we often mean the sense in that admitting that we are not perfect. I sometimes struggle to admit that I am not actually a god, I struggle to admit that I can't do everything, and which has led to some various downfalls in the past. But there's also a huge amount of vulnerability in admitting when you are wrong, or when you do something and you mess it up. And that was a lesson that I learned. I learned to never again send hate mail, which I did anyway. No, that's a different story. But I learned that we're not perfect, and we do make mistakes. And so the beautiful thing about vulnerability is that you can put yourself out there, and hopefully your tears and your blood and your sweat won't be caught on photograph. And so I guess the funniest part of this story is that 2 weeks ago, I was at QMS for their band concert. And you know who works at QMS? Mr. Robertson works at QMS with my mother, just so you know. He's her boss now. And I'm coming to see my brother and sister in their band concert. And I go and I sit down on my seat, and someone comes and sits down next to me, and I look over, and who is it? It's David Robertson. And I'm like, oh, I hope he doesn't know who I am. And he goes, hello, Grace. And I go, oh, hi, Mr. Robertson. How are you? I'm willing to let bygones be bygones. I'm hoping he's forgotten about the whole thing. And he says, oh, I'm good. You're looking well, much better than when I last saw you, that is. You were all crying and upset because you thought you had offended me because you sent me hate mail. And I was like, oh, yes. Those were the days, weren't they? He's like, what are you up to? How's life at Shawnigan? And I go, oh, I'm a prefect. And he goes, really? I would have never guessed. I said, well, I learned a very valuable lesson that day in being vulnerable. And he goes, oh, well, that's good. I'm glad I was good for something. And I go, yep. And then the band starts, and I get out of the theater as quickly as I could without having to talk to him again. It was a little bit embarrassing. So yes, there is great power in being vulnerable. There's power in being vulnerable in me standing here today. I did not plan this speech, but I guess it's good to get the confession out, And just, I guess, reiterate how leadership is humility and being vulnerable and admitting when you are wrong. Like Jeremy, there are many times when I have not been the perfect prefect because, well, perfection doesn't exist, but I've been far from it. I think I missed prefect duty like 4 times, and it was always when Elliot was on duty. So Elliot now has a bit of a grudge against me, so I'm really sorry, Elliot. I really am. It wasn't intentional, I promise. Anyways, now that my spiel is done, I imagine you would also like to say some closing remarks.
Let's do the hymn first. Let's do Canon Land.
Oh, all right. We're going to do a hymn first.
It's number 11.
Yeah. All right. Callan Lan, number 11. Give it your best British, Welsh accent.
I don't think I've heard you in finer voice all year. So thanks to the prefects for the theme of vulnerability. I think we've all absolutely loved this chapel service. It's been touching, it's been memorable, and it's been deeply comic as well. And even how you chose the hymns with that great line, "Be thou still my strength and shield." And I hope that Shawnigan, for all our grade 12s, Shawnigan and the friendships you've forged here have been your strength and shield. I do just want to do a little plug before the end on the Laramie project, which was first written and performed in 2000. I went to the matinee yesterday. Please put your hand up if you are in the cast and crew of the Laramie project. Just identify yourselves. There are actually quite a lot. Come on, a full hand right up, not a crooked little thing. Sophia, go on. It's just your height. It's extraordinary. It's powerful. It's disturbing. It's a seamless production and performance. And of course, all the performers are being vulnerable on the stage. The play starts with a hate crime, and it reminded me of the genre-busting cowboy film Brokeback Mountain that was produced in 2005, which in fact finishes with a hate crime. There's a lot of parallels between the two. So, if you haven't, go to the Laramie Project tonight. If you didn't see one of those two performances yesterday, and support your peers. If you haven't watched Brokeback Mountain, do so. If you haven't read the short story by Annie Proulx from 1997, which inspired Brokeback Mountain, read it. Mr. Doyle wrote to me today to say he was so moved by the production, so deeply moved, that I'm sure you will be watching the films like Brokeback Mountain and Philadelphia, all genre-busting, breaking genre boundaries, and showing it in Ripley's. So, enjoy track and field this afternoon. There's been lots to take pride in this week. And finally, given there's one prefect behind me who had the job of introducing Callum Lan, and Grace and I, between us, stole that opportunity from him, Josh Green. Josh, I'm going to invite you to lead out the prefects instead of me leading the school out of chapel. So as the organ plays, let's hear it for Josh and the prefects. This is your moment, Josh.